The sound of soft rain fell against the window, steady and calm like the slow rhythm of a familiar song. Somewhere inside that sound, her soul used to find peace. She had lived her life surrounded by melodies, by applause, by the glow of the stage lights that once made her heart race. She was known across the country as a piano genius, a performer who made people cry without saying a word. Her fingers could turn pain into beauty, and her music had touched thousands. But that night, everything ended. The stage had been packed for her anniversary concert. It was supposed to be her biggest performance, a moment of celebration. After the show, as she drove home through the quiet streets, the rain grew heavier. The city lights blurred through the wet windshield, and her thoughts were still full of the music she had just played. She didn't see the truck coming from the corner. The crash came with a sound so sharp it split her world apart. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in her car. The ceiling above her was low and gray. The smell of dust and detergent filled the air. Her body ached. Her hands felt rough and her head spun with confusion. She tried to sit up, but her body didn't feel like her own. She looked around. An old room, plain walls, a small bed, and a uniform hanging by the door. It looked like a maid's outfit. She blinked, thinking she was dreaming. Maybe she had been rescued and was in a hospital, but this didn't look like one. A voice called from outside the door, sharp and impatient. "Why are you still in bed? Get up before the manager catches you slacking again." She froze. The voice wasn't familiar. Her heart started to race. When she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror by the bed, she stumbled backward in shock. The face staring back at her wasn't hers. It was the face of a young woman, pale, tired, and with eyes full of fear. Her fingers trembled as she touched her cheek. It felt real. Not a dream. Not an illusion. Somehow she was in someone else's body, in a maid's body. The door burst open and another maid stood there, arms crossed. "What are you doing? Do you want to get fired again? Breakfast needs to be ready in 10 minutes. The pianist tried to speak, but her voice came out weak. I don't understand." "Of course you don't," the maid scoffed. "You never do. Just hurry up. The CEO hates it when things are late." She was pushed out of the room before she could say another word. The mansion was huge. White walls, shiny floors, and a quiet that felt heavy. It wasn't her world anymore. Not the bright stage or the grand piano. It was a world of orders and rules. She followed the others into the kitchen, copying what they did, her mind still spinning with confusion. Hours passed in a blur. She learned the maid she had become was named Lena. The others didn't like her much. They whispered behind her back, calling her lazy, clumsy, and useless. Apparently, this Lena had always been at the bottom, the one who got blamed for others' mistakes. Every mistake earned a scolding. Every scolding pushed her further into silence. That night, when everyone had gone to sleep, she sat alone in the servants' room. The air was still. Her hands, though rougher than before, still trembled with a familiar itch, the need to touch a piano. She whispered softly, "What happened to me? Why am I here?" But there was no answer, only the quiet hum of the night. The next few days were a test of endurance. She tried to adapt, tried to remember her duties, but everything was new. Cooking, cleaning, washing. Every mistake brought laughter from the others. "Look at her," one of them said. "Can't even hold a broom right." Maybe her brain's full of air. She forced herself to smile even when it hurt. Inside, she was breaking. One morning, as she was cleaning the grand hall, her eyes caught something that made her heart stop. A piano. It stood near the far corner, covered with a white sheet. It looked old but beautiful. She walked toward it slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the keys beneath the cover. Dust covered the surface, but the shape felt like home. When no one was around, she sat down. Her heart raced. She pressed one key. The sound was soft but pure, like a voice whispering from another life. Her hands moved on their own, remembering patterns her mind hadn't forgotten. A small melody filled the air, trembling at first, then strong and full of emotion. For the first time since she had woken up in this strange life, she felt alive again, but her moment of peace didn't last long. "What do you think you're doing?" The harsh voice came from behind her. She turned quickly. It was the head maid, a strict woman with sharp eyes. "You think you can just play the boss's piano?" She snapped. "Do you want to get fired?" "I'm sorry," the pianist said softly. "I didn't mean to—" "Enough!" The woman cut her off. "You're a maid, not a musician. Know your place." She was forced away from the piano. her heart aching as if someone had taken away her breath. That night she cried quietly, not from fear but from loss. She had already lost her name, her body, her career, man, and now, even music was forbidden. Still, she couldn't stop herself. Every night after everyone went to bed, she would sneak into the hall and play again, softly so the sound wouldn't carry too far. Each note was a secret prayer, a reminder of who she used to be. Her fingers, though rough and blistered from cleaning, still knew the dance of melody. Sometimes she imagined she was back on stage, with the lights shining on her and the audience silent in awe. But when morning came, she returned to scrubbing floors and serving tea as if nothing had happened. One evening, while she was polishing the staircase, she heard voices near the hallway. "Did you hear that piano again last night?" one maid whispered. "It's haunted, I swear." "No one's supposed to play it," the other laughed. "Maybe Lena's sneaking in again." "Wouldn't surprise me. She probably thinks she's some kind of artist." "She should know her place," the first one sneered. "No one will ever look at a maid like her twice." Their words stung, but she stayed quiet. She had learned that silence was her only shield. A few days later, the CEO returned from a business trip. The whole mansion buzzed with tension. Everyone ran around cleaning, preparing his favorite meals, and making sure everything looked perfect. He was known for being distant and strict, a man who demanded perfection in everything. When he entered the hall that evening, his presence filled the room. Everyone bowed slightly. She caught a glimpse of him, tall, serious, and sharp-eyed. For a second their eyes met, but he looked away without a word. To him, she was invisible, just another servant. That night the rain came again, the same sound she remembered from her old life. She felt drawn to the piano once more. She told herself she would play just one song, a quiet one like a lullaby for her own lost soul. As her fingers moved, she didn't notice someone standing near the doorway, watching. The CEO had returned to the hall to take a late call, but stopped when he heard the faint sound of music. The melody was simple but full of emotion. It spoke of longing, loss, and quiet strength. For a moment he forgot where he was. When she finished, she quickly covered the piano and turned around, only to see him standing there. Her heart stopped. He looked at her silently, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She froze, unsure what to say. "I just practiced a little." He frowned slightly. "No one plays like that without years of training." "I don't remember much," she said quietly. "It just comes naturally." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned away. "Don't let anyone hear you play without permission," he said, his tone softer than before. After he left, she stood there in the dim light, her heart pounding. For the first time since she woke up in this strange world, she felt a spark of hope. Someone had finally heard her music again. She didn't know what would come next, whether it would bring more trouble or a new beginning. But one thing was clear. Even trapped in a life she didn't choose, the music inside her refused to die. The next morning, the air inside the mansion felt different. It wasn't just the faint smell of polished wood or the quiet hum of servants moving about. It was the way she felt inside. Something had shifted. After the CEO heard her play, she couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger or mockery. It was something else. A quiet surprise, maybe even a trace of curiosity. She didn't know what it meant. But for the first time since waking up in this new life, she didn't feel completely invisible. Still, the rest of the staff didn't change their attitude toward her. The other maids continued their gossip, whispering and laughing behind her back whenever they got the chance. "She's always sneaking around trying to impress someone," one said while folding laundry. "She's lucky she hasn't been thrown out yet." Another one snickered. "Didn't you hear? The boss saw her last night. I bet she got in trouble again." She said nothing. She had learned that silence was stronger than argument. Yet every word pierced deep inside, reminding her that she no longer belonged anywhere. Not in her old world. Not in this one. Her days continued the same way, cleaning, cooking, and quietly enduring the endless chores. But something new began happening every night. Sometimes, when the house was still and the moonlight slipped through the window, she could hear faint footsteps near the hall. Once she caught a shadow standing near the piano after she played, watching from a distance before disappearing. She suspected it was him, the CEO. He never said anything, never asked again about her music, but she knew he listened. It was strange. but she began to look forward to it. The feeling that someone, even if distant, cared enough to hear her. One afternoon, the household was preparing for an important dinner. A foreign investor was visiting and everyone was rushing to make everything perfect. The kitchen was chaos and the head maid was in a foul mood. Every small mistake brought harsh words. While helping to set the dining table, she accidentally dropped a glass. The sound shattered through the hall. Everyone froze. The head maid's voice thundered. "You clumsy fool. Do you think we have time to replace this now?" "I'm sorry," she said quickly, trying to pick up the pieces. A small shard cut her finger, but she didn't stop. "You're always sorry," the woman spat. "You're nothing but trouble." The other maid stood nearby, smirking, pretending to work while watching her embarrassment. She lowered her head, fighting the urge to cry. "Enough," said a voice from behind. Everyone turned. The CEO stood at the doorway, calm but firm. The room went silent instantly. "She made a mistake," the head maid said quickly, trying to defend her tone. I heard enough," he said simply. Then he looked at the pianist. "Clean it up and have your hand treated." "Yes, sir," she said softly, unable to meet his eyes. As he left, the room stayed silent for a long moment. When he was gone, the head maid's glare returned, but this time she said nothing. The rest of the staff went back to work, whispering under their breath. Later that night, after the dinner was over and everyone had gone to bed, she stood by the piano again. Her fingers still hurt from the small cut, but her heart felt lighter somehow. She began to play slowly, letting the music flow like water. It was a gentle tune, almost like a thank you, even if the person it was meant for would never hear those words. But he did hear them. The next day, she was called to bring tea to his office, something that had never happened before. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the tray. His office was large but quiet, filled with books, awards, and framed photos of past achievements. He was sitting at his desk, looking through some documents. "Leave it there," he said without looking up. She placed the tray down carefully and turned to leave, but then he spoke again. "That song you played last night," he said slowly, "what was it called?" She froze. "I don't know," she said honestly. "It just came to me." He looked up at her for a moment, studying her face as if trying to read something beyond the words. "You play like someone who has lived through pain," he said finally. "Not many people can do that." She didn't know how to respond. "Music is the only thing that makes me feel alive," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned back to his work. "You can use the piano when the hall is empty. Just don't neglect your duties." Her eyes widened slightly. "Thank you." It wasn't much, but to her it felt like a door had opened. A small space where her true self could breathe again. From that day forward, her nights at the piano were no longer secret. Whenever her chores were done, she would play softly, her music filling the mansion with warmth that even the cold walls couldn't contain. Some of the staff began to notice the change. "The boss seems different lately," one maid whispered. "He doesn't scold as much," another laughed. "Maybe it's that girl's music." "I swear it's like magic." They said it jokingly, but she didn't care. For once, she wasn't invisible. One evening, the CEO's sister came to visit. She was elegant, confident, and kind, very different from her brother's distant personality. As she passed through the hall, she heard the piano and stopped to listen. When the song ended, she clapped softly. "That was beautiful," she said, smiling. "Who taught you?" "No one," the pianist said, embarrassed. "I just learned by feeling." The woman smiled wider. "Feeling is the best teacher. You have a rare gift. My brother told me about you. He said you play with heart." She felt her cheeks warm. "He said that?" "Yes," the sister replied with a knowing look. "It's not easy to impress him." Later, when the CEO came downstairs, his sister teased him. "You've been hiding a musician in your house all this time?" He shrugged, pretending not to care. "She's just one of the staff." "Maybe," his sister said, smiling, "but I haven't heard anyone play with that kind of emotion in years. You should let her perform sometime. It might do this cold house some good." He didn't reply, but she could see he was thinking about it. A week later, an unexpected opportunity arrived. The company was hosting a charity event for underprivileged children. The CEO's team had hired an orchestra to perform, but the pianist fell ill the night before. Panic spread among the organizers. When the CEO's sister found out, she said without hesitation, "Let her play." The staff laughed when they heard. The Maid? At a charity gala? That's ridiculous. But the CEO didn't object. Let her try, he said simply. The next evening, as the guests filled the hall, she stood backstage in a simple dress borrowed from the wardrobe department. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. She hadn't played in front of an audience since her past life, since the night everything ended. When her turn came, she walked to the piano under the warm lights. The crowd murmured softly, confused by the sight of a young maid sitting before the grand instrument. Some of them whispered, "Is this a joke?" But she closed her eyes and began to play. The first few notes trembled slightly, but soon her hands found their rhythm. Every memory, every struggle, every moment of pain she had endured poured out through her fingers. The music was pure emotion, tender, aching, and full of hope. The room grew still. People stopped talking. Even the waiters paused. The CEO watched from the front row, his expression unreadable. But deep down he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Warmth. When the final note faded, silence hung in the air for a heartbeat before the audience erupted in applause. Some even stood clapping with genuine admiration. She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. She had done it, not for fame, not for glory, but for herself. After the event, the CEO approached her quietly. "You reminded everyone tonight that real talent doesn't need titles," he said. "You've done well," she smiled faintly. "Thank you for giving me the chance." He paused before speaking again. "It wasn't charity," he said. "It was respect." That night, as she returned to her small room, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The world still didn't make sense. She still didn't know why she had been given this strange second life. But for the first time, she believed there might be a reason, a path leading somewhere brighter. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. The music inside her was stronger than the life she had lost. It was her truth, her voice, and her way forward. The applause from the charity event echoed in her heart for days. For the first time in this new life, she had felt seen, not as a maid, not as a servant, but as someone who still carried music in her soul. Yet as quickly as it came, the feeling began to fade. The next morning, everything went back to the same routine. The staff acted as if nothing had happened. Some even mocked her behind her back, saying she had just been lucky. "She only played because the real pianist got sick," one of them said with a sneer. "Don't think she's special now." "She looked like she was about to faint on stage," another laughed. "I bet she can't even do it twice." She heard their words, but she didn't argue. Deep inside, she knew that no insult could take away what she felt that night. Still, part of her heart ached, not because of the mocking, but because she missed the world she had once belonged to. The bright lights, the gentle sound of applause, and the way music once defined who she was. Now, every time she touched the piano, she felt both joy and sorrow. The CEO, however, had changed slightly after that night. He didn't speak much, but his tone with her softened. When he passed her in the hallway, he gave a small nod. A simple gesture, but one that meant more to her than words could express. Sometimes he would stop by the hall while she played after her chores and listen quietly without interrupting. One evening, he called her into his office. She entered nervously, unsure why. "You've been practicing," he said, glancing at a stack of papers on his desk. "Yes," she replied softly. He leaned back in his chair. "There's an upcoming cultural event next month, a piano competition hosted by one of our partner organizations. They're looking for fresh talent." She stayed silent, not understanding what he was implying. "I've already submitted your name," he continued. "If you're willing, you'll represent the company." Her eyes widened. "Me? But you're not just anything," he interrupted gently. "You have skill. What you played that night wasn't luck. It was real talent." For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly. "I don't know if I can. It's been so long since I performed like that." He looked at her with calm confidence. "Then it's time you remember who you are." His words echoed in her chest long after she left the room. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window in her small room, watching the moonlight fall across the floor. Could she really do it again? Could she step back into that world, Vaughn, even in someone else's body? Over the next few days, she practiced every night after her chores were done. The music came back to her slowly, like an old friend who had been waiting patiently. Some nights she made mistakes and grew frustrated, But she refused to give up. The CEO occasionally checked in, though he never said much. His quiet support gave her strength. Meanwhile, the other maids grew more resentful. They couldn't understand why their employer was treating her differently. "She's acting like she's special now," one muttered. "All because she can press a few piano keys." "She'll embarrass the company," another said. "Just wait. When she fails, he'll finally see what a mistake she is." Their words didn't reach her anymore. She had learned to tune out everything that wasn't music. Days passed quickly. The competition drew near. On the morning of the event, she dressed in a simple white dress chosen by the CEO's sister. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel like herself again. Her heart beat fast as she stood backstage among other contestants. Most were professionals, young, confident, and trained for years. She could hear snippets of their warm-ups, each note clean and precise. She closed her eyes, reminding herself why she was there. Not to win, not to prove anyone wrong, but to honor the part of her that refused to die, even after losing everything. When her turn came, she walked to the piano. The audience was large, and the bright lights made it hard to see faces. For a moment, her hands trembled. Her mind flashed with memories of her old concerts, the applause, the cheers, the accident. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note came out soft, then another and another. Slowly, the music began to rise, carrying every emotion she had buried deep inside. It wasn't a perfect piece. There were small hesitations, moments of fragility, but it was honest. It was alive. Each chord told her story of loss, struggle, and rebirth. The audience grew silent, completely drawn in. Even the judges leaned forward, watching her hands move with graceful precision. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness before the hall erupted in applause. She bowed deeply, tears in her eyes. It wasn't the same as before, but it was enough. She had found herself again. Backstage, the CEO was waiting. When she saw him, she smiled weakly. "I didn't expect them to clap like that." He gave a small smile in return. "You earned it." Later that evening, when the winners were announced, she didn't expect much. But when her name was called for first place, she froze in disbelief. The hall burst into cheers once more. Reporters rushed forward, eager to know who the unknown pianist was who had beaten professionals. She held the trophy in her hands, feeling its weight, not just of metal, but of everything she had gone through. She looked toward the audience and caught the CEO's gaze. For the first time, she saw genuine pride in his eyes. After the ceremony, they walked outside together into the cool night air. She looked up at the stars, smiling softly. "I never thought I'd play again," she said. "Not after everything that happened." He looked at her quietly. "Life doesn't always give us what we want, but sometimes it gives us what we need." She turned toward him, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think this happened for a reason?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe you were meant to remind others and yourself that no matter where you start, your true gift always finds a way back." They stood there for a long time in silence. It wasn't romantic or dramatic, just peaceful. Two souls connected by something deeper than words. The next day, when she returned to the mansion, the atmosphere was different. The same people who once mocked her now greeted her with awkward smiles. Some even congratulated her half-heartedly. The head maid, who used to look down on her, avoided her eyes altogether. She didn't gloat. She simply continued her work as before, but this time with quiet dignity. She had no desire for revenge. Her victory wasn't against them. It was for herself. A few days later, the CEO called her into his office again. "There's been interest in you since the competition," he said, showing her some papers. "Music academies, media companies, even sponsors. They want to meet you." She looked at the documents, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. "You've earned it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." He shook his head. "I didn't believe in you," he said quietly. "I just saw someone who refused to give up, and that made me believe in myself again." That night, as she played the piano in the quiet hall, the notes felt lighter, freer. She realized something important. Her story wasn't just about music or fate. It was about rediscovering the courage to keep moving forward when everything seemed lost. She wasn't the same person who had woken up in that small, dusty room months ago. She was stronger, humbler, and more alive than ever. The world had tried to break her, but instead, it had carved her into something new. And as her music echoed through the mansion once more, even the walls seemed to listen. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, fame, love, or another challenge, but for now, she was content. The piano had given her back her soul, and with it, she had found her purpose again. Somewhere deep inside, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." The applause from the charity event stayed with her for days. For the first time since waking up in that strange new body, she felt noticed again. People had listened to her music and felt something real. But the next morning, the house was exactly the same. The same routines, the same cold looks from the others. They spoke behind her back, saying she was lucky, that she had only played because the real pianist was sick. She let them talk. Inside, she knew the truth, that she had played from her soul. Still, it hurt to return to silence after the sound of clapping hands. She missed the stage, the lights, the way her fingers used to fly without fear. Every night she touched the piano, her chest filled with both joy and sadness. The CEO seemed different now. He didn't speak much, but when he passed her in the halls, his eyes softened. Sometimes, while she practiced quietly, she sensed his presence in the doorway, listening. He never interrupted, yet she could tell he was moved. One evening, he called her to his office. She entered nervously, unsure why. Papers were spread across his desk, and he didn't look up right away. When he finally did, he said, "There's a music competition next month. It's a good cause, and we're one of the sponsors. I want you to represent us." Her heart skipped. "Me, but I'm not." He raised a hand. "You're not just anything. You have real talent. Let the world see it." She stared at him, words stuck in her throat. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her that way. That night, she sat awake for hours, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. Could she really perform again? Could she face a crowd when she wasn't even herself anymore? The next weeks became a blur of work and practice. Every night after chores, she sat at the piano until her fingers ached. The music returned slowly, like water flowing through a cracked stream. The CEO sometimes stood nearby, saying little, but his quiet presence gave her courage. Meanwhile, the others in the house grew more bitter. They whispered that she was pretending to be someone important, that she would embarrass the company. Their words no longer reached her. All she heard was the rhythm inside her. When the day of the competition arrived, she wore a plain white dress the CEO's sister had chosen. Backstage, surrounded by trained musicians, she felt small. Their fingers moved with practiced confidence. They belonged here. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she had come, to honor the part of her that refused to die. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her, and for a second she forgot how to breathe. Then she laid her hands on the keys, and everything else disappeared. The melody started softly, like a memory returning. Each note carried the story of her struggle, her loneliness, and the tiny sparks of hope that had kept her alive. The hall grew still. Even the judges leaned forward. By the time the last chord faded, the silence was deep and full. Then the applause came, loud, honest, and warm. Backstage, she found the CEO waiting. "You played beautifully," he said simply. "I didn't expect them to listen," she whispered. "They didn't have a choice," he replied. "You made them." Later that night, the results were announced. When she heard her name for first place, she froze. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked where she had come from, but she could barely speak. She had spent her life chasing applause, and now, in a life she hadn't chosen, it had found her again. Outside the hall, the CEO stood under the cool night sky. She joined him, still holding the small gold trophy. "I never thought I'd play again," she said quietly. He looked up at the stars. "Sometimes life closes one door so we'll notice another," he said. She smiled. "Maybe this was meant to happen." "Maybe," he said. "But you're the one who chose to keep going." The next morning, the mood in the mansion was strange. The same people who once mocked her now offered shy congratulations. The head maid avoided her completely. She didn't gloat or change her tone. She just did her work as always, only now with calm confidence. A few days later, the CEO asked to see her again. "You've received offers," he said, sliding a few letters across his desk. "Music schools, sponsors, even a television interview." She stared at the papers. "I don't know if I'm ready." He shook his head. "You already proved you are. The world saw you." Her throat tightened. "Thank you for giving me the chance." He looked at her for a long moment. You reminded me that passion matters more than status. You didn't just find yourself. You made everyone else remember what honesty sounds like. That evening, she returned to the piano. The mansion was quiet, the air soft with the scent of rain. Her fingers danced across the keys, light and free. She wasn't playing for anyone now. She was playing for peace. She thought about everything that had happened, the accident, the confusion, the fear. It all seemed far away, like a story she had read long ago. Maybe she would never understand why she had been given this strange second chance, but she understood what to do with it. Music had carried her through loss and pain. It had given her a way to speak when words failed. And now it had brought her back to herself. As the last note faded, she closed her eyes and smiled. She was no longer the broken woman who had woken up in a stranger's body. She was someone new, someone stronger. The world outside still buzzed with its noise and judgment, but none of it mattered. She had found her rhythm again, and that was enough. Far down the hall, the CEO listened from his office. He didn't interrupt. He simply let the melody fill the silence, a quiet reminder that hope can live in the unlikeliest places. When she finally stood and covered the piano, she whispered to the empty room, "This is just the beginning." And somewhere deep inside, she believed it. The following months changed everything. The once quiet maid who no one noticed had become the center of attention. People whispered about her talent, how she rose from nowhere to win one of the biggest music awards of the year. Her face began to appear in small interviews, short clips, and even news articles. But she didn't let it get to her head. Every morning she still woke before dawn, helped in the kitchen, and took time to practice. The mansion felt different now. The air wasn't heavy anymore. The same people who used to look down on her now treated her with respect. Some did it out of guilt, others out of genuine admiration, but she didn't hold grudges. She had learned that bitterness only slows you down. The CEO watched all of this quietly. He didn't say much about the attention she was getting, but it was clear he was proud. He started involving her in small projects, helping organize events for the company. At first, she was unsure why he trusted her with such responsibilities. But he said something that stayed with her. Talent attracts people, but sincerity keeps them. She had earned that trust not by demanding it, but by being true to who she was. One afternoon, the CEO asked her to join him at a meeting in the city. They were visiting a foundation that supported underprivileged children who had dreams in music and art. As they entered the hall, she saw a group of children playing old instruments, some broken, some out of tune, yet their eyes were full of hope. After the meeting, she walked over to the children. One little girl tugged on her sleeve and asked, "Is it true you started as a maid?" The question made her pause, but she smiled and said, "Yes, and I still help in the kitchen sometimes." The girl's eyes widened. "Then maybe I can play on a big stage one day too." She knelt down and said softly, "If you don't stop dreaming, you will." The CEO stood behind her, watching that moment quietly. Later, as they drove back, he said, "You have a way of making people believe again. I haven't seen that in years." She turned to look out the window. "Maybe it's because I had to start from nothing," she said. When you've lost everything, even a little bit of light feels worth chasing. As time went on, her life began to blend two worlds, music and management. She started helping organize concerts that raised money for education. Slowly, she became more involved in the company's creative projects. The CEO noticed her sense of balance, how she handled people with kindness and calm, and began to rely on her more. One evening, he called her to his office again. On his desk were a few documents and a single black folder. He looked serious but gentle. "You've done so much for this company," he said, "and more importantly, for the people in it. I want you to lead the new division we're starting, music and cultural development. You'll have your own team." Her breath caught. "Lead?" He nodded. "Yes, it's time you stopped hiding behind others. You've already proven what you're capable of." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The same woman who had once been mocked for being a maid was now being asked to lead. The memory of those early mornings, the harsh words, the loneliness, it all flashed through her mind. Then she smiled slowly, her eyes shining. "I'll do my best," she said. The first months in her new role were challenging. She had to make decisions, manage people, and face the same skepticism she'd once endured, but now on a larger scale. Yet she handled it all with patience. She listened more than she spoke. She worked harder than anyone else, and soon the results began to show. The division she led grew rapidly, building partnerships with artists, supporting young talents, and bringing a new energy to the company. The CEO often said that her department reminded him why the company had started in the first place, not just to make profits, but to create value that touched lives. But success didn't change her heart. She still visited the Children's Foundation every month. She taught piano lessons there, telling them stories of her journey. She told them about failure, about second chances, and about the strange ways life gives you opportunities when you least expect them. One night, after a long day at work, she sat at the piano in her office. It was late and the building was quiet. She played softly, letting the notes fill the empty space. The CEO walked by and paused at the doorway. "Still practicing?" he asked with a small smile. She turned, surprised to see him. "I can't sleep unless I play," she said. He stepped inside. "That's how I know you'll never lose who you are." She looked at him, unsure how to reply. There was a long silence, warm and calm. He finally said, "You've changed this place more than any business plan ever could, and I'm grateful for that." She smiled gently. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I just didn't want to waste it." He shook his head. "You earned it." The weeks turned into months, and her story began inspiring people outside the company. Journalists wrote about her journey, calling her the pianist who played her way out of servitude. But she never liked that title. She would always say, "I didn't play my way out. I played my way into myself." One day, the CEO announced he was stepping down. It shocked everyone. During the farewell meeting, he looked at her and said, "The board and I agreed. You're the right person to take over this company." The room fell silent. She felt her heart pounding. "Me?" she asked quietly. "Yes, you," he said. "You understand people, not just business. You see value where others see limits." Tears filled her eyes, but she tried to smile. "I don't know what to say. Just promise you'll keep believing in what brought you here," he said softly. When she took her seat as the new CEO, she didn't feel powerful or proud. She felt peaceful. She remembered the first day she had woken up in that unfamiliar room, scared and lost, and now she was sitting in the top office of the same building, the same place where her journey had begun. That evening, she sat by the window, looking down at the city lights. Life had taken her through paths she never imagined. She had lost one world and gained another, but through it all, one thing had stayed the same: her love for music. She turned to the piano near her desk and began to play a quiet tune. The melody carried the story of her whole life, the pain, the hope, the lessons, the love. Outside, the city moved fast, but in that room, time seemed to slow. When the song ended, she whispered, "Thank you," though she didn't know if she was speaking to fate, to life, or to the person she used to be. The next morning, she walked into her first board meeting as CEO. People rose when she entered, their respect genuine this time. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. She talked about honesty, compassion, and how success meant nothing without kindness. By the end of the meeting, the room was silent, not because of her title, but because of the truth in her words. Years later, when people told her story, they didn't just speak about her skill as a pianist or her rise to success. They spoke about her heart, how she faced cruelty without losing gentleness, how she turned pain into purpose, and how she never forgot where she started. She became a symbol of hope for people who thought they had lost their chance in life. And she often said, "Sometimes life breaks you open just to show what's hidden inside. Don't be afraid of the cracks, and they let the light in." One evening, as she walked past the piano in the main hall, she touched the keys softly. The sound was familiar, comforting. She smiled, remembering everything: the nights of doubt, the tears, the small victories. And as the soft notes filled the air, she knew deep down that she had never really been lost. She had simply been on her way home unto herself.